Et bonjour mes élèves, c'est Madame Brown, and this is the second of two videos on conjugating regular ER verbs in French. So in the first video, I talked about how to conjugate regular ER verbs, and in this video, we're going to try to put that into practice. Allons-y. Pratiquer, time to practice conjugations. I work at the shops. First of all, what's your subject pronoun? In this occasion, it is je, meaning I, our first person singular pronoun. The verb infinitive we need to use is travailler, which means to work. Remember, the double L makes a Y sound. So, to conjugate the verb, we drop the ER. If our subject pronoun is je, how do we conjugate the verb? We simply add an E. Je travaille au marché. You sing opera. Subject pronoun on this occasion is tu, meaning you in an informal context, as if we're friends or acquaintances. The verb infinitive is chanter, which means to sing. Now, to conjugate the verb, we need to drop the ER, and to agree with the subject pronoun tu, how do we conjugate the verb? Tu chantes l'opéra. The verb ends with an ES, tu chantes. Remember, we don't pronounce the S, though. He plays soccer. Our subject pronoun is il, meaning he. The verb infinitive is jouer, meaning to play. To conjugate the verb, we have to drop the ER. Now, how do you conjugate jouer to agree with il, third person singular? Il joue au foot. You simply add an E to the end of the verb stem. She visits the hospital. Our subject pronoun is elle, meaning she, and our verb infinitive is visiter, which means to visit. So to conjugate the verb, you drop the ER. To agree with the subject pronoun elle, how do we end the verb? With the letter E. Elle visite l'hôpital. We walk to the grocer. Our subject pronoun on this occasion is on, which means we in a very casual conversational context. The verb infinitive is marcher, which means to walk. So to conjugate the verb, we have to drop the ER, and to agree with our subject pronoun on, how do we need to end the verb? With just the letter E. On marche à l'épicerie. We live near the park. The subject pronoun is nous, which also means we, but maybe in a more formal context. The verb infinitive is habiter, which means to live, but more like to inhabit, like to live in a place, as opposed to live and breathe as a human being. So to conjugate the verb, we drop the ER, and to agree with our subject pronoun nous, how do we end the verb? With an O and S. Nous habitons près du parc. Do you speak Italian? Subject pronoun is vous, which also means you, but in a formal context. So perhaps with someone that we don't know very well, or perhaps in a professional context, or maybe just someone who's older than us, and we're showing them respect. But remember, vous can also be collective you, as in all of you, or y'all. The verb infinitive here is parler, which means to speak. So to conjugate parler to agree with vous, you drop the ER, and how does the verb need to end? With EZ. Vous parlez italien. Now remember, you can also ask a question. Parlez-vous italien? Do you speak Italian? But it's hyphenated if you want to do that. They win the championship. Our subject pronoun is elle. It's plural. It means they. It's a group of females, so we're using elle as opposed to il. Our verb infinitive is gagner, which means to win. So to conjugate the verb, we drop the er, and for third person plural, which is elle, how should our verb end? With ent, ent. Elle gagne le championnat. But remember, don't pronounce the ent. They're watching a video. Our subject pronoun is il, as in they. It's a mixed group, feminine and masculine people, so we use il. The verb infinitive is regarder, which means to watch. So how do you conjugate regarder to agree with il, third person plural? You drop the er and add ent. Il regarde une vidéo. Just remember, don't pronounce the ent. And don't pronounce the S on il either. Okay, let's try to get through these quickly. Parler, which means to speak. He speaks French well. How do you conjugate parler? Il parle bien le français. It just ends with an E. Chanter, to sing. You all sing together. How do we conjugate chanter? Vous chantez ensemble. The verb ends with EZ. Vous chantez. Inviter, to invite. I'm inviting all of my friends. How do we conjugate inviter? J'invite. J'invite tous mes amis. It just ends with an E. Aimer, to like. Do you like the soup? How do we conjugate aimer to agree with the subject pronoun tu? Tu aimes la soupe. The verb ends with an ES. Jouer, to play. We are playing tennis tomorrow. How do we conjugate jouer to agree with on? On joue au tennis demain. The verb just ends with the letter E. Danser, to dance. They are dancing with us at the show. How do we conjugate danser to agree with they, il, third person plural? We drop the ER and add an ENT. Il danse avec nous au spectacle. Écouter, to listen. We are listening to the teacher. How do we conjugate écouter to agree with nous, first person plural? We add ONS to the verb stem. Nous écoutons le professeur. Marcher, to walk. They are walking to work. How do we conjugate marcher to agree with elle, third person plural? You drop the ER and add ENT. Elle marche au travail. All right, just a few more. Goûter, to taste. Taste the cheese. Here the subject pronoun is vous, but you don't need to say vous in the sentence because it's a command. It's understood to mean you. So we drop the ER and add EZ. Goûter le fromage. And as soon as you say goûter, ending with an A sound, people understand that you're using vous because it's the only verb conjugation that ends with that sound. Arriver, to arrive. I'm arriving tomorrow. How do we conjugate arriver to agree with je? We drop the ER and add an E. J'arrive demain. Remember, because arrive starts with a vowel, je becomes J apostrophe, J apostrophe. Chercher, to look for. He is looking for his dog. How do we conjugate chercher to agree with il, third person singular? We drop the ER and add an E to the verb stem. Il cherche son chien. Travailler, to work. They work at the school. How do we conjugate travailler to agree with il, third person plural, meaning they? We drop the er and add ent to the verb stem. Il travaille à l'école. Fermer, to close. You close the door. How do we conjugate fermer to agree with tu as a subject pronoun? Tu fermes la porte. The verb ends with an es. Habiter, to live. We live in Sydney. How do we conjugate habiter to agree with nous? We drop the er and add ons. Nous habitons à Sydney. Visiter, to visit. I'm visiting the museums today. How do we conjugate visiter to agree with the subject pronoun je, first person singular? We drop the er and simply add an e. Je visite les musées aujourd'hui. And finally, regarder, to watch. She is watching the performance. How do we conjugate regarder to agree with elle, third person singular? We drop the er and add an e. Elle regarde le spectacle. Et c'est tout. Merci beaucoup et bonne journée. Au revoir, à la prochaine.